Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Medea. I want to thank you and welcome you to today's webcast, Ball State University and Chevrolet, New Carbon Credit Methodology and Applicability to Energy Efficiency Projects. We are delighted to have three esteemed guests with us today. David Toloskis is the Sustainability Director for General Motors. In this role, he is responsible for developing the company's sustainability strategy and ensuring alignment with its business model. His key activities include working with various functions to embed sustainability into their processes, sustainability reporting and external rankings, and identifying key performance indicators and goals for business planning. David will speak first today about Chevrolet's commitments and the carbon reduction initiative. Sue Hall will follow David and will discuss the more technical components of the program, including how the methodology was developed. Sue is the Chief Executive Officer of the Climate Neutral Business Network. Her work over the last 15 years has focused on supporting companies and other stakeholders create business-based solutions to environmental problems. Her current work focuses on companies' strategic response to climate change. Her clients have repeatedly demonstrated that even radical climate-neutral commitments can successfully maximize returns to both their core business development objectives and to the climate. Finally, Bob Kester will discuss Ball State's decision-making process and experience with the program. Many of you on the line know Bob, and it's hard to overstate his contributions to our sustainability community over the years. But briefly, Bob is the director of the Center for Energy Research, Education, and Service, and professor of architecture at Ball State University, and has taught a number of architecture courses over the years. He was honored in 2011 by the College of Architecture and Planning Alumni Association with the Charles M. Sappenfield Award of Excellence for outstanding dedication, contribution, and commitment to the education of students of the College of Architecture and Planning. He serves as founding chair of the University-level Council on the Environment, a clearinghouse for campus-wide sustainability. We will hear from each of our presenters today and still allow plenty of time for your questions and answers at the end of their remarks. So please make sure that you use the question function on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions to the presenters so that we can take them near the end of the presentation. Next slide. Thank you, Gabby. So thank you again for participating. Just a brief update about Second Nature and the ACU-PCC. Second Nature, as you know, leads the American College University's President's Climate Commitment, as well as capacity building, financing, and resilience initiatives, which support campuses and decision makers in higher education, transform institutions and education for a more just and sustainable future. As of March this year, more than 680 institutions have signed the commitment, representing more than a third of students across the country. More than 2,100 greenhouse gas inventories have been submitted, 530 climate action plans, and 360 progress reports on those climate action plans. In what is likely a surprise to no one, as a result of implementing their climate action plans and investing in reducing energy consumption, institutions have realized significant cost savings on their campuses. In fact, 72% of signatories submitting a progress report to date have affirmed that their climate action plan has saved their institution money. Of the 364 institutions that submitted a progress report, 200 listed savings from implementing projects total $168 million. Which brings us to our presentation today. Chevrolet is investing in clean energy efficiency initiatives of colleges and universities across the nation through its voluntary carbon reduction initiative. Chevy helped create and develop this new carbon credit methodology with clean energy efficiency stakeholders so that campuses can earn money for certain upgrades that reduce their GHG emissions. This funding enables universities to reduce their impact and save money on utility bills while engaging and educating students in their efforts. Our campuses in particular are increasingly pursuing aggressive clean energy efficiency efforts, from installing more efficient building equipment to using renewable energy to help power operations. With this initiative, Chevrolet will buy and retire carbon credits resulting from some campuses' greenhouse gas reductions, either from LEED certified buildings or other campus-wide energy savings initiatives. I will now turn it over to David to talk more specifically about Chevrolet's commitments and goals for this initiative. David?
Thank you, Michelle. Second Nature is doing some great work, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share with your members a potential opportunity to help them achieve their long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So why is Chevrolet, committing up to $40 million to retire 8 million tons of carbon? Well, it really started out in 2008 with a challenge from Chevy leadership. And that challenge was to make Chevy the first carbon neutral vehicle brand. Well, frankly, we're still working on that challenge. But coming out of these discussions was this idea to use carbon reductions to make a lasting impact across the country and in communities where our customers live, and to help them prepare for a low carbon future, primarily through clean energy and energy efficiency projects. And this was just an extension of what we were trying to do and are doing with our products and plants. So if you can go on to the next slide. So we've been at this, as I mentioned, since 2008. And to date, we've retired over 5.2 million tons and have contracts. From a contractual basis, we've achieved our goal of 8 million metric tons of carbon, but we still have about 3 million to go to actually retire that. So this project is going to go through part of next year. But as we began investing in these projects across the country, and we've invested in about 27 so far, not including the university and colleges. But we really weren't really satisfied with the amount of clean energy and energy efficiency projects that were going beyond business as usual and were eligible for carbon credits. So we decided to come up with a methodology to do just that. And that also coincided with the time where 600 plus universities were making pledges of carbon neutrality and talking about what they were doing. So it seemed to be a really good fit, that if we could come up with a methodology for universities, it'd be a win-win. We'd be helping to clean the grid, encourage innovation and ingenuity in really, the hotbeds of ingenuity and innovation across America, so on college campuses. So and from a strategic perspective, it was a way to maximize the performance of the Chevrolet electric vehicles that we launched in 2010 and subsequent to that with the Volt and the Spark. So we're really excited about this project. We have about 12 universities lined up. We've announced 3 of them so far. You're going to hear from really the pioneer in this, Bob Kester at Ball State. Valencia College was also one of our pilot campuses working on this, and subsequent to them, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has also announced their participation, and we've got 9 others in various stages of agreement, and you'll be hearing about them over the next several months. If you could go on to the next slide. So I'm not going to read all of these, but hopefully you'll get an idea of the interest and significant exposure that this activity has garnered. And that should tell you that there's a real interest out there of what universities and colleges are doing. I mean, you guys are really being looked at as the hotbeds of innovation, as I mentioned, and you guys are helping to drive the nation and being expected to innovate and be pioneers on clean energy. So we've seen a great interest whenever universities or colleges have talked about this or issued press releases, or even ourselves. We've seen a great interest and a great pickup from a variety of media outlets. And for Chevrolet in particular, we achieved a really milestone, and that we weren't really expecting to in this short period of time. But with the Chevy Carbon Reduction Initiative, it really was an activity that helped convince Interbrand, which is a globally renowned public relations firm and marketing firm, to add us to their 2014 Global 50 Green Brand list, which was a great accomplishment for the team there, and they're something they're really proud of. If you go on to the next slide. So from GM's perspective, it's really important to support clean energy and efficient innovation on campuses across America. We want to do it not just on campuses, but again, as I mentioned, there just isn't a lot of activities that are going beyond business as usual to qualify for carbon credits. But we think that we found a great area to start with to help lead the way. And in addition, it's providing a real strategic and unique way to drive cleaner and energy efficient grid that aligns with what we're trying to do, again, with our products and our plants. And we hope that and think that along the way that this has been helping to change people's perception of Chevrolet, and we've have seen definitely some conversion of people who avoided the brand to now considerers, those that really are passionate about the environment, understand carbon, and this is something that they value, and we're trying to align our activities with their values. So it's been a really good project, and with that I will turn it over to Sue to really talk about how the project is working, and then and help provide you more details on it.
Terrific. Well, many, many thanks, Dave, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to explore this topic further here with everyone today. So as Dave was mentioning, Chevy's leadership with their $40 million helped to create a new methodology that would enable campuses for the first time to sell carbon credits. And so what we're going to look at here is essentially a few kind of fundamental questions. Why would a campus look to sell carbon as credits rather than buy carbon credits towards their carbon neutral goal, which has been the more kind of traditional approach? How do you know when you might be eligible for funding like this from Chevy? But going beyond Chevy, where would you look for sources of funding from the carbon market? How would you secure funding for your campus of this kind in the way that Ball State and others have been able to pioneer? What would it take to actually move through that process? What are some of the key implementation steps that you'd need to be able to embark upon? So with the next slide, we turn to the first question. As Eben Goodstein kind of remarked, campuses have been purchasing carbon credits for a very long time towards their carbon neutral goals. But why now would you look to sell carbon credits? Because that's what this new methodology enables you to do that Chevy developed, and obviously that's what Chevy's funding has opened the door, opened the opportunity for you to do for the first time. Well, the business case behind this is really very intriguing. We've looked at this in detail with U.S. Green Building Council, with ASHE, with some of our pilot campuses at like Ball State. And the carbon revenues can contribute somewhere between about 5 and 25% of the incremental capital that a campus needs to move from what might be a business as usual level of energy and carbon performance to a level of leadership that would be eligible for funding of this kind, of beyond business as usual level of leadership. In practice, what that means, there are two pathways through which you can earn funding through this methodology. One focuses on LEED certified individual buildings, and the other is funding that's received for broad campus-wide performance. And pragmatically speaking, there's several $1,000s that you could earn in credit funding for an individual LEED certified building, but tens of thousands of dollars into millions of dollars for projects over a campus on a campus-wide basis over a 10-year period. So the level of funding varies significantly. Campus-wide really takes you into some very significant kind of domains. One of the things that one obviously needs to be careful about as you sell carbon reductions to other parties, Chevy is retiring theirs, other parties might want to use them for other purposes, but you've got to be careful that you report those accurately to the ACU-PCC or STARS or other reporting programs to which you report, so they're not double counted. And the way in which many campuses have aligned their carbon neutral goals to their ability to now sell reductions is that they'll sell them for a period of years towards that year where they've got an anchor goal, say in 2020, and as they approach their anchor goal, they might not sell credits that year, so that the reductions can be used, not only the ones they were achieving, but the extra reductions that they've been able to deliver with the new sources of funding, they can then account for all of those reductions towards their campus goals. So really, the new methodology opens up an entirely new source of funding for campuses from the carbon market to help you accelerate your clean energy and carbon leadership. Next slide, please. The foundations for any such sales obviously need to be credible, and the foundation here is the new methodology that has been certified by the Verified Carbon Standard. It's a performance methodology, and what that means in practice is that it is not designed to look at simply the implementation of a particular technology that you might have picked in a particular building. It is able to evaluate your performance over all of the energy efficiency and clean energy activities that you have on campus and measure the results of those on an integrated basis. It's simple to use. It was tough to build. I can answer more about that later if you're interested, but there are simple performance metrics that you need to pass. And the way in which to evaluate your eligibility builds upon your existing campus greenhouse gas data from ACU-PCC or STARS, or in the case of your LEED certified building from LEED. So it's relatively straightforward to use, and there are certainly tools to support you there. So its genesis was somewhat unusual, but it's the performance of your campus that matters. Next slide, please. So your performance, for example, for campus-wide is based upon an analysis of, in fact, all of the active campuses within a given category, and you need to essentially be in the top roughly 15% in order to be eligible for funding. Next slide. What that means in practice for campus-wide is that either for stationary one on-site combustion emissions or for your Scope 2 electricity purchase greenhouse gas emissions, you need to be getting a reduction rate, as you see there, classified by Carnegie class of roughly 5 to 6% per annum on average. Those reductions are calculated against a 3 to 5 year historical emissions baseline, and that's the fundamental component for the campus-wide eligibility. You need to have at least a couple of activities from a designated list that have driven your performance, but that's the key performance metrics that you need to be able to meet. Next slide. When we look at individual LEED buildings, those need to be certified as new construction or existing buildings by LEED. And again, there are performance benchmarks that you need to meet. And those are predominantly anchored upon your EUI percentage improvements over code for the NC buildings. Various different numbers there, whether you're a higher ed or a lab or a school. But the good news is that with all of these benchmarks, this information, again, is visible and accessible and already provided in your LEED certification documents for your building. So again, this builds on your existing LEED certification and all the information you already have in-house. And the calculation of your reductions uses the EPA Target Finder tools. So again, it's readily accessible and simple to use. Happy to take further questions on the details here when we get to the Q&A. Next slide, please. So having evaluated whether or not you're eligible for funding, the question then really becomes, where would I look for funding? Beyond Chevy, who's pioneered this effort, the U.S. voluntary carbon market is actually really substantial. To give you a feeling for that, Chevy's 2010 commitment was 8 million tons of reductions, and that was about twice the size of the voluntary market at that point in time. The U.S. voluntary market now is roughly 30 million tons in total. And that's not the compliance market, that's just the voluntary market. The pricing for carbon ranges from about $1 to $3 a ton for commodity projects, but more like $5 to $10 a ton for boutique projects. And these campus energy efficiency projects are very much in that boutique range of the spectrum. They are unusual. Currently, there's only about 1.3 million tons of projects that are coming through the pipeline from campuses, which is about 130 tons a year. And you can see, compared to that 30 million tons, you're a small segment, you're a small slice. Your projects would be rare. They carry some really interesting salient community benefits. And so, the kind of pricing that one could potentially expect is certainly at an interesting end of the spectrum. In terms of accessing that funding, the sales channels in the U.S. voluntary market predominantly come through carbon brokers. Bonneville Environment Foundation, that's been acting as Chevy's independent buyer, is certainly very active in that boutique market. So Native Energy, the Carbon Neutral Company, and several others. Happy to take questions later. The basic process, so there's a couple of ways in which projects can be funded. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough, like with Chevy, you can get an upfront purchase for several years, an upfront commitment. More typical would be that you would place a project with a broker on consignment. And as purchases were made for your project, then those tons would be drawn down. And obviously, that's more of a contingent sale basis. Next slide, please. More than about a dozen campuses are taking advantage of this first tranche of funding that's coming in from Chevy. Not only Ball State, we're looking forward to hearing from Bob here shortly, and Valencia College, which were the two pilot projects. But the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, announced the largest actually carbon project in this segment to date just a few months ago, and there'll be another 9 projects announcing shortly. So keep tuned for announcements through the ASHE newsletter and obviously through Second Nature. And all of their blog, their blog articles for the further updates there. Next slide. To actually move through a certification process, there are 3 fundamental steps. You need to get your project validated. That happens once up front through the Verified Carbon Standard certification process. And that makes sure that you have ticked every single box and your project does indeed pass all of the applicability conditions, you've got all the performance benchmarks down, and you're good to go. And when you're good to go, you're good for 10 years. You earn the right to sell credits for 10 years. Each time you want to sell the credits, you need to have them verified. You sell credits based on your actual carbon performance, not your projected performance. And so the auditor needs to come in and make sure to measure the actual reductions that you have delivered each year. The verification audits are periodic. Sometimes they're done annually, sometimes biannually. And that's a separate step, and it takes place throughout the 10-year period. Each time you register the credits for sale on one of the VCS public registries so that there is transparency relative to credits that have been sold from your campus. And the process essentially is a bit like an energy audit. This time it's done for campuses, so that you need to make sure that your energy invoices track to the inputs to your CACP calculator, to your ACCPAC reporting, into the VCS project calculations. And you'd be working with some of the accredited certifiers at DNV in order to get this process completed. Next slide. Chevy has helped to develop some fantastic resources that campuses are using. There's a lot of web-based materials that will support here, both from U.S. Green Building Council, from ASHE, and increasingly now from Second Nature. Some of the tools which Chevy's developed include some very simple Excel templates that Bob will speak about a bit further that enable you to assess very quickly using your greenhouse gas data from ACCPAC. You drop it in, and it tells you whether you're eligible, and it tells you what your reductions would be for a project. Real turnkey, real simple. Similarly, the project development documents that you need to build to go through certification are ones that are more like a multiple choice exam. There are questions to answer. It's not like a PhD thesis. So it's designed to make it as simple as possible. You've also got an increasing fantastic network of campus leaders like Bob who have been extraordinarily helpful in answering questions and providing, the kind of practical experience of how to move through the process and take advantage of this. Next slide. So in summary, there's, I think, a really important legacy here. There's an important new opportunity. The work that all of these campuses have been able to pioneer with Chevy, not only to develop the methodology and to kind of invest in some of the initial projects, but really what's happening here is there is a game-changing innovation enabling campuses to receive funding for the first time from the carbon market in order to extend further their energy and climate leadership. And, as Bob himself remarked, the even better news is that once Chevy has stepped out of the picture with its funding, there is still a voluntary carbon market that is there. The door is open to support your leadership going forward. And that's an extremely exciting opportunity. So with that, I'd like to turn this across to Bob so that you can learn from one of the masters, as it were, in this domain about how Ball State University has been able to take advantage of this unique opportunity.
Thank you, Sue. What I will do in the next handful of slides is walk through the process whereby we worked with Sue and with Dave and all the players involved in development of the methodology and then pilot testing it and explaining how this aligned with our campus-wide installation of a district-scale geothermal ground source heat pump system that services a full 47 buildings on our campus. Next slide. Some years back, the university was facing the challenge of replacing its central heating plant because we had coal-fired boilers that were really beyond their life. They were more than 50 years old. And so the university began the process of exploring opportunities for switching out that system with something different. We had become a signatory to the ACU-PCC, which Sue calls ACUPAC. That meant that we were committing the institution, our president was committing the institution to becoming climate neutral by some future date. And following the guidelines of the ACU-PCC, we immediately undertook some measures to begin complying with that goal. And then we're able to integrate this longer-term planning for the campus as a whole with that mission of going climate neutral. We came upon the realization that rather than switching out to a more efficient combustion of fossil fuel, would be wiser to go with a central plant that was coupled to the ground using ground source heat pump technology and to do it at a district scale. Given the fact that we're a publicly supported institution and we get money from the legislature for capital projects, we had a chunk of money appropriated then to switch out our heat plant, and we were able to use that money and dedicate it toward the installation of this geothermal technology. When the system is completely finished, which will be in about 1.5 years, we'll have 2 energy stations on the north and south end of campus. You see the 2 yellow areas to the north and the yellow area to the lower left on the south. Those are the borehole locations. We have a total of 3,600 boreholes that will be used to heat and cool buildings. All 47 buildings on campus will be connected. It's going to take a total of 7 years to build this thing out. We're well along in the process. All the green buildings that you see are already online for heating and cooling, and all 47 buildings are online for cooling. So we're waiting on the south half of campus to be connected in the next 1.5 years to be able to do the heating of those in the next couple of winters. As it turns out, the total project cost comes in at about $83 million. We were able to get that money from the legislature. But if you compare the annual savings that we're going to experience, it's about $2 million a year net savings operational cost, which on the marginal difference between a more efficient fossil heating plant and this system, it's about a $25 million premium that we're paying for the geothermal project within that $83 million. That means that we're getting about an 8% return on investment. So in about 12 years, we will have saved enough money in annual operating expense to cover the added cost of going geothermal. And thereafter, for the next 50 years or so, that'll all be additional savings that we will continue to accrue. Next slide. This is a profiling of the strategic planning that we did for campus greenhouse emission reduction. Once we signed the ACU-PCC, we had a task force that looked at how to do this, and we decided to do something a little bit different than many institutions had tried before. If you follow the wedge diagramming that was developed at Princeton, where there's discussion about how to turn down the ramp up of business as usual, take the red line at the top and knock it down a few percent or a few more percent to get a wedge of reduction in emissions. That's a conventional approach to business as usual conservation. We decided to not follow that kind of trend lining and instead to actually quantify the reduction that we were going to undertake and schedule it in 5-year increments so that we could coordinate it with our strategic planning. And as you can see, this first big wedge, which is yellow and green, is the impact from our geothermal project. Now, when we ran the original ACU-PCC greenhouse gas inventory in '08, we were emitting about 192,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent on an annual basis. As we got into the work with Chevrolet and with Sue at Climate Neutral Business Network, developing the methodology and testing it out, we came to realize that that yellow chunk that you see is in fact the amount of energy that we sell to the regional hospital that's located across the street from our campus. So really, that chunk is assignable to the hospital, and the university itself is actually at 154,000 metric tons back in the '08 inventory. The total green wedge reduction, however, the yellow and green, the big arrow that you see, is what we're going to be able to achieve, about 85,000 metric tons of removal from our 2008 emissions with the installation of the geothermal project. Now, there are other complexities involved, and we're still tracking and tracing these. We do purchase more electricity, and in our part of the country, a lot of the electricity is generated from coal-fired production, so there's a kind of give back that happens there. But this is a first pass overview of the general strategy that we're using to go after carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest. The little yellow wedge you see off on the right there, number 7, that's our fail-safe final stroke, in which if we have to, the presumption would be that we would buy renewable energy credits. But again, this mapping of reductions occurred prior to working with Chevy to undertake this new project. Next slide. This is just a quick shot of some of the early work when we were drilling the boreholes on the north side of campus, the patterning of those in groups of 15 sets and how they're networked back to the energy station. Next slide. This is an excerpt from the methodology that Sue referenced. This is the spreadsheet that is used to determine whether or not your institution qualifies to work with Chevy in its carbon reduction initiative effort. By using your Clean Air Cool Planet calculator and the kind of data sets that you've submitted to ACU-PCC in your annual reporting, you're able to load in information and arrive at what's revealed here in the middle of the slide, where it says that in our case, the campus's average percent of reduction was 18.75%, which exceeded the 5.86 benchmark that we would have had to meet in order to qualify. So we are going beyond business as usual. We are in the upper percentile of what's achievable, and so this meant that we could go forward with the project and work with Chevy to secure some of these funds. Next shot. In completing the spreadsheet, the next thing that has to happen is one has to build a project description document, which Sue described as a kind of multiple choice test package. It's a whole series of questions you go through and answer yes, no, and then fill in appropriate detailed narrative. But a project description document, which is about 30 pages in length, is a fairly straightforward thing to package. We built that. We ran that through some reviews and then helped Sue to fine-tune and test whether or not the interactivity of that document was real useful, the template that you provided. And that worked out quite well. So we had a really nice package that then described our $83 million effort at bringing the whole campus to carbon neutrality through initially the installation of this ground source heat pump technology. Once you have that document, however, you then have to demonstrate how you monitor and record and aggregate information so that over the 10-year period that you're going to qualify for, Det Norris Veritas can confirm that you do indeed have not only a valid project, but you can verify your annual reductions. And so that's the monitoring report. Again, this is a template you fill out, you answer questions, you provide written narrative where it's needed. And it was helpful to us because although we knew we had a methodology, we had never written it down. and we had never really externalized the process we had gone through over the last many years to aggregate data that we use in the ACUPCC reporting. So this turned out to be a real helpful step to go through, because we now have internally a very clear set of responsible parties and job descriptions, if you will, of who does what when, and we now know that we can monitor and be assured that the data we're collecting is being gathered in a very responsible manner. So we have both the project description document and a monitoring report, which then, as packages, were submitted to Det Nors Veritas to go through the hurdle of validation and then verification. Next slide. One of the other concerns that came out in the early conversations was, if we're using Clean Air Cool Planet calculator as our tool for determining what our annual greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide equivalent numbers are, and our goal is to get to climate neutrality, but then we're going to maybe play in this market with voluntary carbon sales, how do we justifiably avoid double counting, as Sue pointed out? And we work with the ACUPCC folks and the Clean Air Cool Planet calculator folks to determine that the best way to report out these kinds of transactions is in the category of non-additional renewable energy certification. We actually report any transactions we've made to Chevrolet as negative values in the retail offset category. So that goes back against our reductions. Now, initially when folks hear about this, they get nervous because they seem to feel intuitively that this is a problem, because if your goal is to go climate neutral, and now you're giving away, or selling away rather, your reductions, isn't that working against your goal? And the answer is no, because the reductions are annual accumulations, and the goal is longer term. And the way in which we can justify engaging with this Chevrolet Carbon Reduction Initiative and sell these transactions is because, in fact, we can use the income from this transaction to drive our reductions more deeply. So we see this as a temporary way of leveraging our impact for even greater impact, with the longer term goal of, toward the end of the 10-year window, all of the climate reductions remand back to the university, and at that point we're at some deeper level of reduction than we would have been able to get to without this incentive funding. So this is the technique whereby you can report this in the Clean Air Cool Planet calculator. Next slide. One of the other things that is part of the process is when you submit your project description document and your project monitoring plan, the outside readers with Det Nors Veritas then come back to you with a rather elaborate spreadsheet in which you have to identify corrective actions and clarifications. So we received a multi-page document, and this is the first page of it, from them saying we need clarification on things, and on the right-hand column you see our response and what we did to clarify. In most of the cases, this is just a case of some typos or some technical errors, numbers being transposed, that kind of thing. In other cases, it requires clarification of language because terms get used in ways that mislead the reader. So we completed this clarification process with them, submitted this document back to them. This is the first page of what we submitted, and then got a sign-off that indeed we had met all of the requirements in this first pass review. So this enabled us then to get through that validation hurdle. Next shot. One of the other things that comes out of the spreadsheet that Sue was referencing is that you can then begin to profile your reductions over the years for this 10-year window of time. And you can estimate the total cumulative energy conservation and emissions reductions that you can expect at the close of the 10-year window. In our case, well over 200,000 metric tons. We in fact think that's going to be an even bigger number, but right now this is the projection using a conservative estimate within the spreadsheet. But this allows us to do some longer range planning in anticipation that if indeed we continue to transact in the voluntary carbon market, we can schedule, if you will, some future income to help drive more deeply our energy emissions reductions. Next slide. And then finally, as do all schools, we had to create a climate action plan at the time of completion of our initial greenhouse gas inventory. What you see here is the cover page of our document, which is on the PCC website. The red notes that you see on the left of the cover page reference an update which occurred in May of last year. So we had the original document that was back in 2009, 2010, and then we updated it more recently. The reason to show this slide is to simply say that the PCC allows for you to update and make transparent the continuing transformation of your reporting. So as things become more clear and as you get more accurate data and as you get more information about your efforts at carbon reduction, you can in fact report that and share that. On the right, I won't go into the detail, but you see here a mapping of different ways of achieving those block reductions that you saw in our climate action plan. Next shot. We have questions that we can answer. I'm happy to respond to anything related to our experience at Ball State, but of course Michelle will talk to you about contacting the rest of us at the close of this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody, and participants, I would encourage you to still keep submitting your questions as you have them, but we're going to go ahead and get started with just a few of them. Sue, I think I'm going to direct this one to you. When can projects begin securing their carbon reduction credits, and for how long?
Thanks. Yes. Well, with the new verified carbon standard methodology, there is a grandfathering window that's open essentially until February 2016. And what that means is that you can bring projects forward during this time interval that could go back and begin their reductions and the sales that they make starting in, say, fiscal 2012. That's been a pretty typical starting date for most of the projects coming through the methodology so far. And so if you started in 2012 fiscal year, you'd have 10 credits, 10 years of credits to sell. But the thing to note here is that this VCS grandfathering window doesn't exist in perpetuity. After February 2016, you would have to have your campus project essentially begin contemporaneously with you getting validated. So you would probably be looking at your project start year happening in about 2016 or so fiscal. So there's an intriguing window of opportunity here if you're measuring your greenhouse gas reduction performances against those benchmarks using the tool that Bob just described. There is a window open here for another 18 months or so, where if you have reduction rates that are eligible for projects that might begin with their first year in 2012, 13, 14, or even 15, now's the opportunity, now's the window to bring those through. Because after February 2016, those early years would no longer be eligible as the years in which your project could start.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's turn back to Bob. There was a question from somebody who's working at a college in Seattle. Could you describe, if at all, the process that you use to involve students with this effort that you've undertaken? How did you make it a part of student learning at all?
Yes, we've had students involved in a number of different ways. First of all, students are currently monitoring the performance of the geothermal project. When we installed the borehole field areas, we placed instrument wells all around the edge of the zone so that we have a way of tracking and monitoring what's going on underground. And students under the direction of geology faculty are doing the real-time monitoring of that and generating reports and ultimately papers and studies over the years that will come out of it. So we've had students involved in the actual geothermal project. We had students involved in the task force work that developed the climate action plan, and we've got students involved now in helping with some of the data management for the Clean Air Cool Planet submissions and the ACU-PCC and related STARS and GRI reporting that we do. So we've had students involved in every dimension of this that we can weave them in. In some cases, the students are involved as grad assistants. In other cases, they're paid employees. In other cases, they're getting credit through our immersive learning program that we have at Ball State.
Thank you very much. I think this question next is directed to Sue and or David. Does the Chevy program cover all costs associated with validation and verification?
Yes, Chevy's been very generous here. For the campus projects that it is where it's investing and purchasing their reduction credit, Chevy has been paying for both the validation and the verification costs for the tons that cover the period of their purchasing. So I think from a campus perspective, that really sets a fantastic precedent for you all. Because as you go out to the broader voluntary market, you can reference the fact that Chevy has paid for the validation and verification costs. Typically, you know, those range somewhere in around about the kind of $7,000 to $10,000 kind of ballpark for both for validation, and then again another 10 or so, 7 for verification. So you know that's approximately where the costs come in and would be incurred, and obviously campuses would be looking to cover those costs themselves if the carbon purchasers that they were working with weren't stepping up to the plate in quite such a kind of solid way as Chevy has been.
Yeah, this is David. I'll just add, we recognize that this is new for all the stakeholders involved, and just wanted to remove as many barriers as possible to the universities are already doing an incredible amount of work just to measure, monitor their emissions, and really focus on the numbers and the performance. So everybody's doing a lot of work at this, and hopefully we're with these projects that we've already announced and that we'll be announcing over the next several months, that at the end of this, for us anyhow, we'll create a critical mass of participants and supporters that this will continue being used for a long time. And the more and more that this performance methodology is used and proved out, I think those costs will be optimized, or they'll be the lowest cost possible, because there'll be a lot of examples already out there to reference and to follow.
Okay, thank you. Sue, we've heard a bit from the Ball State example, but in general, from the campuses that you've worked with, can you give us a general sense of how much time it takes to get a project certified? Walk us through the process and the length of time from beginning all the way through.
Yes, sure. Well, with the campuses that we've been working with so far, I mean, Ball State is a rather special case because we were working with Ball State and with Bob Kessler as a pilot. So they've been involved with us for an extended period of time, helping to develop the methodology and making sure that projects were a good fit for the methodology as it was being drafted. But for campuses that approach this kind of de novo, it's typically taking probably a month to 2 months to prepare for project validation. and that would essentially mean making sure that we're completing the Excel template sheets, the project development documents, and then accessing the utility summary reports and making sure the campuses have got all the invoices accessible so that if the validator asks to see some of the supporting information, they're ready to go and all the data's lined up smoothly and perfectly. That takes a couple of months. It's obviously not full-time work for campuses. This is something that you manage to pull off amidst everything else that you're also already doing. But the tools are designed to be as streamlined as possible so that you efficiently draw on data that you've already got in-house, and it's designed to be streamlined. The validation process itself, it's essentially about 3 to 4 phone calls with a little bit of follow-up between each of them that take place over roughly a period of a month. DNV will then complete its validation report in the following month. So that's 2 months worth of time. The verification reports are very straightforward to build. You have essentially done the work for this as you put the validation together. So it's a short walk to get that next report done and in and submitted. It's maybe another month. Again, it's like maybe a phone call or 2. So that's approximately the timeline and the level of effort. And I would say that as campuses have looked at this, that's obviously been a question that they've asked up front, and the carbon revenues involved have more than clearly covered the level of effort in terms of staff time that campuses have been investing.
Sue, I think this question is probably for you. Could you review and elaborate on the eligibility criteria? I think it's a pretty high bar. If you could take us through that piece again.
Yes, sure. The slides here that you'd really want to look at when you look back at the PowerPoint presentation that's going to be distributed are on the campus-wide and then the LEED eligibility. So for campus-wide, you need to achieve reduction rates. These are percentage annual reductions in your stationary 1 and/or your Scope 2 electricity-based greenhouse gas emissions that exceed the specific numbers that are applicable to your Carnegie category, and they're roughly in the 5 to 7% annual reductions a year. And so you're comparing there the, say, your 2012 greenhouse gas emissions levels to the levels that you were emitting during one of the previous 5 years. And you need to get over that bar in one or both of those 2 credit categories. At the same time, during that same time interval, you need to have an absolute reduction in your stationary 1 and those 2 electricity greenhouse gas emissions. So you can't be robbing Peter to pay Paul. You can't, for example, have a stupendous reduction in your stationary 1s, but have your electricity emissions going through the roof. There's a balance in here where your absolute level of emissions in both categories need to be declining. The other major applicability conditions that govern eligibility, you need to be a US-based campus. Well, that one's ticked normally pretty readily. But you need to be able to describe at least 2 activities that you've been undertaking, like, for example, Ball State's geothermal system investments. You need to be able to describe at least 2 activities that have really driven that performance level, and you need 2 out of, at the minimum, out of about 8 categories that you've fulfilled. And typically what we find for campuses that are eligible, they're ticking, 3, 5, 7 categories in terms of the activities that have driven that performance level. So those are the major kind of criteria for campus-wide. For LEED, this is for LEED individual certified buildings, and there are 2 groups where the methodology provides you access to funding. The first is for new construction. And in terms of eligibility there, you're probably familiar with the LEED certification documents that you would already have in-house for your LEED buildings. And they already measure the EY % improvement over code. That's essentially your energy intensity metric. It's the amount of BTUs you use per square foot. And your LEED certification materials measure what your energy use intensity looks like and compares it to what code would be for your region. And the methodology requires that you have at least approximately a 24, 25, or 26% improvement in EUI over code. And that metric was picked because it represents the LEED certified building average. That's the average of what all LEED campus buildings perform at in the United States. And similarly, you need to have, in terms of activities, you need to have undertaken and gained credits in at least 2 of the LEED air and energy credits for that MC building. But it's the performance metric, that EUI metric, that's the most important. For existing buildings, there are 2 ways to qualify. One of them is based upon your performance under the Energy Star ratings. So if your existing building retrofit, once you come online, it's giving you an Energy Star 86 level of performance or better, then you would be eligible for funding. Alternatively, if you have an existing building that couldn't be certified before you undertook that LEED set of improvements, then you could also be eligible if you improved your EUI, that's again your energy use intensity, your BTU per square foot, if you improved that metric by 20% or more when you compare your previous level of performance before your renovations for the existing building and the level of efficiency that you're delivering for your new building as it comes online.
Okay.
And in all of these contexts, essentially what you're seeing here is that the carbon methodology for eligibility looks to measure your actual delivered performance. And in that sense, certainly USGBC is very excited to see the emphasis being placed not only on how your buildings get certified in the design phase, but how they actually perform. And for campuses, I think one of the exciting kind of extensions, and if you like, from the ACU-PCC perspective, is that you have a third-party certifier that comes in to look at all of your greenhouse gas emissions. And so in that sense, you pretty much, by the end of the stage, got a certified greenhouse gas inventory that has been third-party reviewed as you bring your campus projects forward. So there are other ancillary benefits there, but those are the basic criteria for eligibility.
So we have just a few minutes left. Thank you, Sue. And I want to get to 2 last questions as quickly as we can. One person wrote, most of the energy efficiency initiatives we have undertaken have an equipment life of 15 years. So to clarify, Chevy would purchase the related carbon credits for the first 10 years, and the school would be able to count the emissions reductions for the remaining 5 years. Is that correct? And I would also like to invite my colleague Brett Passanella is on the line. He is a Kresge Implementation Fellow and expert on all things related to the ACU-PCC. So I would invite him to comment on any of this if he has additional thoughts, particularly around the reporting with our systems.
The answer to your question, this is Bob. The answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Once you complete your 10-year window, the credits remand to the institution. So.
And this is Brett, and I guess I would just like to add that reporting is fairly straightforward. I mean, I think a lot of people are familiar with the way that they would report offsets if they had been purchased, and a program like this, you can use the same reporting methodologies, but instead of subtracting the purchases from your net emissions, you're adding metric tons back into your net emissions. So it's pretty much the same process that people are already familiar with from REC purchases or offset purchases in reporting, but just in reverse.
Okay, thanks so much to you both. I appreciate it. And our last question before we close, sort of a bigger picture question. And David or Sue, I think you could handle this one. If more colleges and universities get involved in selling carbon credits, won't this ultimately drive down the cost per ton in the voluntary market? Does this program anticipate federal approval of carbon offsets as a strategy to meet future GHG reduction requirements?
I'll take the first part.
then. You take the first part. I'll take the second part.
So GM Chevrolet specifically has been, I think the top corporate purchaser of carbon credits on the voluntary market in 2012 and 13. And as I mentioned, we've sourced over 5 and retired over 5.2 million tons. So in that period of time, so the market is pretty big. It's much larger than that. Even though we're the largest, I think we may only make up like 20–30% of the purchases during those 2 calendar years. So in other words, the largest campus purchase we may make is less than 200,000 tons. One of the smaller purchases we may be making, are in the hundreds or thousand. So those projects that are over 100,000 tons are pretty rare that we've found. So most campuses are probably talking about a couple thousand, maybe a couple tens of thousand tons. So I don't think it's going to be the volume that drives significant price variation because of volume. My personal opinion.
I'd concur. If you look on an annual basis at the moment, you've probably got about 130,000 tons of campus-based credits coming into the market. And, their boutique projects are going to be, fetching, strong pricing here. And, even if you double, tripled, increase that by a factor of 10, the boutique end of that market has, I think has the capacity to absorb that. In terms of the follow-up question, which I think is quite intriguing, which is, could this gain federal approval? There are compliance markets for carbon credits, as perhaps the questioner was aware. For example, in California with the California CACP, and even in the Northeast with the RGGI region. And the pricing that those credits receive is higher. Compliance credits, are more valuable. There is an interesting path in which voluntary carbon methodologies will very often, not very often, but can sometimes migrate. They migrate into the compliance market. So, for example, the Climate Registry could notice, as indeed they have, this methodology and evaluate and decide whether or not they would like to be able to use an adaptation of this methodology and bring it into California, which is a regulated market. And certainly there are precedents for that. And from a campus perspective, you would have good reason to want to have that happen. The pricing there is, probably $12 or so and up. And it sets the precedent at a regional level for the kinds of methodologies which ultimately, if we move as we move towards a federal cap system, who knows, it may still happen. Those precedents are certainly incredibly helpful because any federal system would look towards RGGI and California and regional cap markets and look to grandfather and incorporate the precedents that they set. So that's actually a very intriguing pathway that it would be to campuses' benefits to continue to pursue and explore.
Okay, that takes you just past we're just past 2 o'clock, so I want to thank all of our presenters for their time today, and a special thanks to all of our participants for participating in the webinar today to learn about this program. And we will have the program available online, so we encourage you to share it with your colleagues if they've missed it, and take another look. And please do reach out to any or all of us with your questions. Our email addresses are there. So thank you again to our presenters and to everybody on the line, and we look forward to staying in touch. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.